Welcome back, everyone, to your daily news roundup. Ready to get into today's top stories.
Absolutely. Let's jump right in.
All right, so first up, we're heading to California, where those devastating LA wildfires are still burning. But it sounds like there might be a little light at the end of the tunnel.
Yeah, there are some glimmers of hope. Containment is slowly improving on those three major fires, the Palisades, Eaton, and
That's
Hearst.
good to hear.
Sadly, though, the death toll has risen to 24,
Oh, that's awful.
and 16 people are still missing.
Oh, wow.
AccuWeather is predicting the financial losses could reach a staggering, well, somewhere between $250 and $275 billion.
Wow. Those are just massive numbers. And to make matters even worse, they've issued a particularly dangerous situation alert for Tuesday because of those expected high winds.
Yeah, it's a really tough situation. Fire Chief Kristen Crowley is urging everyone near the evacuation zones to be ready to leave at a moment's notice. Those winds could really whip up these fires in an instant.
Yeah, absolutely.
Amidst all this chaos, it's been incredible to hear stories of resilience, like the one about 67-year-old Alice Husum in Topanga Canyon. She's decided to stay put, despite those evacuation orders.
Wow. She's not alone. We've heard about quite a few residents choosing to stay and defend their properties, even with the fires raging around them. It really shows the strength of the human spirit, doesn't it? But at the same time, I can't help but worry about their safety.
Yeah, it's definitely a tough call, stay or go. And to make matters even worse, there's been a surge in looting in the evacuated areas, 29 arrests so far.
Oh, gosh.
And some people are even posing as firefighters to take advantage of these evacuees.
Oh, that's just awful.
Yeah. Sheriff Robert Luna even mentioned that he mistook one of these looters for a real firefighter. Can you believe that?
Wow, it's just heartbreaking to see people trying to exploit such a tragic situation. On a slightly more positive note, there's a massive force fighting these blazes, over 14,000 firefighters, 84 aircraft, and 1,354 fire engines.
And to help with security and those looting issues, they're adding 1,000 National Guard troops to the 400 that are already deployed.
It sounds like they're really throwing everything they've got at this, but it's still a very dangerous situation, right?
Absolutely. Around 105,000 people are still under those mandatory evacuation orders, and another 87,000 are under warning. FEMA Administrator Dean Criswell is urging caution for anyone thinking about going back home too soon.
It's definitely not a time to let your guard down, even if things seem to be getting a bit better. And speaking of threats, the FBI is looking into a drone incident.
A drone incident.
Yeah, it seems someone flew a drone right into a super scooper firefighting plane. Can you believe that?
Oh my gosh.
Thankfully, it was only grounded briefly, but still, you've got to wonder what people are thinking.
Right, you've got to respect those no-drone zones, especially around active fires. And speaking of bad decisions, officials are also cracking down on price gouging, those people trying to profit from this disaster.
It's sadly not surprising, but good to see them taking a strong stance against it.
Yeah.
And as if this situation wasn't complicated enough already, there's some political tension brewing between California Governor Newsom and President-elect Trump.
Right, they're both kind of pointing fingers at each other. Trump is saying that it's incompetent politicians that are to blame for the severity of the fires, while Newsom is calling Trump's statements inexcusable misinformation. It's just a sad reminder of how even a natural disaster can get tangled up in politics.
Yeah, it's really unfortunate. It's stories like that of Chef Darren Anderson that really bring home the human impact of these fires. He lost his childhood home in Altadena.
Oh, that's terrible.
And that entire community, they're very close-knit. They've been just devastated by these fires.
It's just unimaginable, losing everything like that. And it's not just homes, it's memories. It's an entire sense of place. Places like that Little Red Hen coffee shop, a local favorite, are now gone.
It's so sad.
Darren's neighbors, Hippolyto Cisneros and Larry Valesquez, they even tried to fight the fire with garden hoses. But, the intensity of the fire, coupled with the water pressure issues, made it a losing battle.
It's hard to imagine feeling so helpless in the face of something like that.
Yeah.
But even amidst all this loss, there are these tiny glimmers of hope, Like Durang, he found a scorched lemon in the rubble of his home.
Oh, wow.
And he took a seed from that lemon to replant as a symbol of starting over.
That's beautiful. It really speaks to the resilience of the human spirit. Even in the darkest of times, there's that flicker of hope.
Now, let's shift gears a bit from those devastating fires to a different kind of story. We're going to take a closer look at the investigation into the fast fashion giant, Shein.
Ah, Shein. This story takes us deep into the world of global fashion, specifically to Shein Village in Guangzhou, China.
Shein Village.
Yeah. Thousands of factories there working around the clock to churn out those trendy clothes that Shein is known for.
Wow.
And what investigators have uncovered are some really grueling working conditions. Some workers are reportedly working up to 31 days straight, often past 10 p.m.
It's hard to believe that kind of thing still goes on.
Hmm.
And what about their pay? Are these workers getting a fair wage for all that work?
That's a major point of contention. While Shein claims they're creating jobs and helping the local economy, the basic monthly wage there is only about 2,400 yuan. That's just 265 pounds or $327.
That's barely anything.
Yeah, it's really low.
Right.
And while some workers can earn more through overtime, there are concerns about excessive overtime and whether those wages are really enough to live on.
It seems like there's a big disconnect between the image that Shein projects and the reality faced by the people actually making their clothes.
Yeah, there's definitely a contrast there. And it's not just the wages and the long hours. Shein has been dealing with a lot of controversy lately.
Like what?
There have been allegations of child labor,
Oh.
accusations of forced labor, and even concerns that they might be sourcing cotton from that politically sensitive Xinjiang region. All of this has really damaged their reputation.
It's a lot to deal with.
It is. But in response to all this, Shein has issued a statement saying that they're committed to fair treatment of workers, they've invested in compliance programs, and they use auditors to make sure their suppliers are following their code of conduct.
Go ahead.
But despite those assurances, a lot of people are still skeptical, especially given the lack of transparency. It's difficult to independently verify those claims.
It really raises the question, can we as consumers continue to ignore the human cost of cheap fashion?
It's a tough question. I mean, Shein's model is built on those massive online inventories, those deep discounts, and those algorithms that churn out trendy clothes at incredibly low prices.
Right.
But at what cost?
It's something to think about for sure.
Mm.
And Shein's isn't just facing pressure from consumers and labor rights groups. Washington is taking notice too.
That's right. There are growing concerns about their ties to China and those alleged labor practices. And this scrutiny comes at a particularly delicate time for the company.
How so?
They're reportedly preparing for a major IPO on the London Stock Exchange. So yeah, this is a critical moment for them. Professor Sheng Liu from the University of Delaware made a good point, saying that it's going to be crucial for Sheng Liu to address these ethical concerns if they want to gain the trust of investors.
It's a tricky situation for sure, trying to balance their business goals with the ethical considerations. And it seems like navigating tough situations is a recurring theme in the news today, particularly when we look at the U.S. political landscape.
Absolutely. As Joe Biden's term comes to a close, there are a lot of reflections on his presidency, especially considering he's leaving office with historically low approval ratings.
Yeah, those approval ratings are pretty dismal.
The most recent Gallup poll put him at just 39%.
Wow.
Which, has prompted some uncomfortable comparisons to another one-term president, Jimmy Carter.
It's a tough spot to be in.
It is. And his presidency has been marked by a string of challenges. I mean, you name it, he's faced it.
It feels like one crisis after another.
Right. From that chaotic withdrawal from Afghanistan back in August of 21, which really shook public confidence, to underestimating inflation.
Right.
The slow response to migration at the U.S.-Mexico border.
Yeah.
Those supply chain disruptions that impacted everything.
Oh, yeah.
You remember those? COVID tests, infant formula, egg prices.
It felt like one thing after another.
And then, of course, those major societal and geopolitical upheavals, like the overturning of Roe v. Wade, the war in Ukraine, the ongoing conflict in Gaza. It's been relentless.
It really has. Were there any bright spots, any successes during his time in office?
Yeah, amidst all those challenges, there were some legislative wins. I mean, the American Rescue Plan, which pumped almost $2 trillion into the economy.
Right.
And that $1 trillion infrastructure bill.
Yeah.
Those were significant achievements.
Those were big, but they definitely came with a hefty price tag, didn't they?
They did. And some critics have argued that those benefits from those policies are taking too long to actually reach everyday Americans.
Right. And of course, there was that constant battle with a resurgent Republican opposition who, they seem determined to undermine the administration at every turn.
Absolutely. I mean, the investigations, the hearings, the impeachment inquiry, it was a grueling political battlefield.
It sounds exhausting.
Yeah.
And we can't forget about the Hunter Biden saga, which, even though ultimately resolved, really cast a shadow over the presidency.
Oh, absolutely. It was a constant distraction and undoubtedly damaged Biden's image.
And ultimately, all of this contributed to his unsuccessful re-election campaign.
Yeah, that disastrous June 24 debate performance in Atlanta really sealed his fate.
That was a tough one to watch.
Yeah, it confirmed those anxieties about his age and his fitness to lead.
Susan Estrich, the Democratic strategist, put it perfectly when she said that Biden wanted to be remembered for rescuing the country from Trump, but his legacy might end up being Trump's return.
It's a poignant observation that sums up the complexities and ultimately the disappointments of his presidency.
And speaking of people who are in the right place at the right time, let's talk about Olympic kitesurfer Bruno Lobo, who pulled off a real-life heroic rescue in Brazil.
Oh, tell me about this.
So he's not just an Olympic athlete, he's also an orthopedic doctor.
Wow, multi-talented.
He was testing out a new camera for kitesurfing when he heard screams for help. Turns out, a woman was struggling in the water, caught in a strong current.
Oh, no.
Without hesitation, he used his kite to reach her and bring her back to shore. The whole thing was caught on camera.
What a story. A reminder that heroes come in all shapes and sizes, and that even Olympic athletes have time for a little real-life heroism.
And Lobo used this opportunity to remind everyone about the dangers of the sea. How quickly conditions can change and how even experienced swimmers can get into trouble.
That's a good reminder for all of us. Now, for a story that shows how the conflict in Ukraine is drawing in actors from around the world in unexpected ways, President Zelensky is proposing a prisoner exchange.
A prisoner exchange? With who?
With North Korea. He wants to swap 2 captured North Korean soldiers for Ukrainian POWs held in Russia.
North Korean soldiers in Ukraine. How did that even happen?
Well, it's believed North Korea has been quietly providing military support to Russia, probably in exchange for resources or some diplomatic favors.
That's interesting. So what's the story with these captured soldiers?
One of them actually claimed he thought he was going to Russia for training and had no clue he'd end up fighting in Ukraine.
Wow.
The SBU, that's Ukraine's security service, has backed up his account, and South Korean intelligence estimates that over 300 North Korean soldiers have died and 2,700 have been wounded fighting in Ukraine.
That's a side of the conflict we don't hear much about. And speaking of global trends, Norway is making headlines for its incredible progress with electric vehicles. They're on track to be the first country to completely phase out sales of new fossil fuel cars by the end of the year.
It's remarkable. They've implemented a combination of policies that make owning an EV a much more appealing option.
Like what?
Well, they have high taxes on those petrol and diesel cars.
Oh, right. But then they offer great incentives for EVs, like tax breaks, free parking, and a really good charging infrastructure.
Makes sense.
Yeah, it's created an environment where choosing an EV is almost a no-brainer for consumers. And it's not just about the government policies either. There's a cultural shift happening as well. Ulf Thor Hekneby, a car dealership CEO in Oslo, even said he feels wrong advising customers to buy combustion engine cars anymore.
Wow. It's really encouraging to see a country taking such a proactive approach to tackling climate change and promoting sustainability. It gives you hope that a future dominated by electric vehicles is closer than we might think.
I agree. And now we're going to shift our focus to the Middle East, where there's a lot of uncertainty surrounding Russia's presence in Syria after the fall of the Assad regime.
Russia and Syria have a long and complicated history.
They do. Russia has been a steadfast ally of the Assad regime for decades, providing military support, having access to key bases. Their influence in the region has been pretty substantial.
But now, with the regime gone, it's unclear what will happen to that relationship. Many Syrians are demanding Russia leave, viewing them as complicit in the Assad regime's atrocities. But will Russia be willing to give up that foothold in such a strategic location? That's the big question.
It's a delicate situation.
It is. The interim Syrian leader, Ahmed al-Shara, has said the relationship with Russia is strategic, suggesting they want to maintain ties. So it will be interesting to see how things unfold. It's a real geopolitical chess game.
It definitely is. And speaking of political developments, Croatian President Zoran Milanovic has secured a second term.
Oh, and a landslide victory, no less.
Oh.
Which, poses a challenge for that ruling HDZ party.
And shifting to Afghanistan, Nobel Peace Prize winner Malala Yousafzai is making her voice heard. She's calling on Muslim leaders to push back against the Taliban's oppressive policies against women and girls.
She argues that denying women access to education and work isn't just unfair, it's un-Islamic. It's a powerful message, especially coming from someone like Malala.
She's an inspiration for sure. Now, across the Atlantic, Canadian Prime Minister Justin Trudeau is firmly pushing back against President-elect Trump's suggestions that Canada might consider becoming, wait for it, the 51st U.S. state.
You're kidding.
Yeah. Trudeau was pretty clear in his response, saying, and I quote, "It's not going to happen." He's not mincing words.
Good for him. It's a good reminder that even with close ties, national identity is still paramount.
Now, in Africa, there was a concerning incident involving Tanzanian activist Maria Sarungi Tsehai. She was abducted in Kenya.
Oh, no.
Fortunately, she was released just hours later after the Law Society of Kenya stepped in.
What a relief.
This incident has really raised fears that Tanzania may be heading back towards repressive rule. Ms. Tsehai is a well-known critic of the Tanzanian government and a prominent voice in the pro-democracy movement.
It's a good thing she's safe. This kind of thing is a stark reminder of the risks that activists take when they challenge those in power.
For sure. Now, over in the Indian Ocean, the French territory of Mayotte has been hit by another natural disaster. Just a month after Cyclone Chido caused widespread devastation, the island has been hit by Storm Nicolette.
Back-to-back storms. That's rough.
It's a reminder of the vulnerability of island nations, especially with the increasing frequency and intensity of extreme weather events.
Absolutely. And meanwhile, in France, there's been a tram collision in Strasbourg, leaving 60 people injured.
Oh, that's terrible. It's a reminder that even in developed countries, accidents can happen. Safety should always be a top priority. Now, over in Sudan, the army claims to have captured the city of Wad Madani from rebel forces.
This is a significant development in that ongoing conflict.
But the situation is still fluid, so it's too early to say what the long-term impact will be.
Agreed. And in Niger, there's been a kidnapping. An Austrian woman, identified as Roswitha Gretzmacher, has been taken by unknown assailants. It's a reminder of the security challenges in the region.
And finally, some good news from Brazil.
Oh, good. Let's hear it.
The government is taking steps to acknowledge the state's role in the deaths of victims during the military dictatorship, which lasted from 1964 to 1985.
That's a long overdue step towards healing and reconciliation.
One story that really highlights this is that of Tessa Mora Lacerda.
Tell me about it.
Well, her father, Gilda Macedo Lacerda, died under torture in 1973.
Oh, that's awful.
But his original death certificate left the cause of death blank.
Oh, wow.
So Tessa has been struggling to get recognition for her father's suffering and to have his death certificate corrected. It's a powerful example of the importance of truth and reconciliation.
It's a story that really underscores the need to confront the past. No matter how painful it may be, it's crucial for moving forward and creating a better future.
And speaking of confronting the unexpected, we have a story that literally fell out of the sky. Residents of Mukuku village in Kenya were stunned when a large metal ring crashed onto some farmland near a riverbed.
A metal ring, what was it?
The Kenya Space Agency investigated and determined that it was a separation ring from a space launch rocket, probably from a European Ariane launch vehicle.
Wow, a piece of a rocket falling from space.
Talk about an unexpected visitor. Fortunately, no one was injured. However, some villagers did report damage to houses near the crash site.
Like what kind of damage?
They said cracks appeared in walls and foundations.
That's unsettling.
It raises some concerns about the risks of space exploration, especially as the industry grows and we launch more and more objects into space.
It's a reminder that progress, even in space exploration, has its downsides. Now, for a story that brings us back down to earth and into the U.S. legal system, Special Counsel Jack Smith, who led the criminal cases against Donald Trump, has resigned from the Justice Department.
And his resignation comes at a rather interesting time.
It does, doesn't it? Right in the midst of the controversy surrounding the release of his report on the classified documents case.
The timing definitely seems significant.
Yeah, it looks like he's stepping down to avoid potentially being fired by the new administration. And with his departure, those criminal cases against Trump won't be going to trial. They were closed after his election victory due to regulations against prosecuting a sitting president.
So the investigations end there without resolution.
That seems to be the case, at least for now. But there's still the matter of that classified documents report. The release of that is where things get even more complicated. Judge Cannon, who oversaw the case, has temporarily blocked its release.
Even though Trump's legal team has a draft.
Exactly. And Trump's co-defendants in that case, Walt Nada and Carlos de Oliveira, who both pleaded not guilty, are also calling for Judge Cannon to intervene, arguing against the report's release. It seems this legal saga is far from over.
And now, for a story that'll leave you scratching your head. The investigation into that Asiana Airlines crash from December has taken a rather perplexing turn.
What happened?
It turns out the flight recorders, those black boxes that hold vital data, are missing the final 4 minutes of information.
Missing? How is that even possible?
That's what investigators are trying to figure out. The recorders were examined in South Korea, but when they discovered the missing data, they were sent to the U.S. for further analysis.
So what are the theories behind this missing data?
One former investigator suggested that all power to the recorders, including the backup systems, might have been cut off, causing the recording to stop. But it's still a mystery, and that loss of data makes it so much harder to determine the cause of the crash. It's a setback for those seeking answers, and especially frustrating for the families who lost loved ones in the crash.
For sure. And now, for a story that's making waves in the Baltic Sea, a Russian oil tanker lost power and steering, prompting a rescue operation by German authorities. But it's more than just a maritime incident.
How so?
Germany is pointing fingers at Russia, accusing them of using what they call a shadow fleet to get around those sanctions on their oil industry.
A shadow fleet.
It's basically a collection of aging, poorly maintained tankers. They're arguing that these substandard vessels are a risk to both European security and the environment. This particular tanker, the Aventin, was carrying almost 100,000 tons of oil.
Wow.
So it was a pretty delicate rescue operation. They had to use tugboats to secure the tanker and prevent a potential oil spill.
It's a stark reminder of the potential environmental hazards posed by these aging vessels. It also highlights how economic sanctions and political maneuvering can have real-world consequences.
Absolutely. It's a complex issue with a lot at stake.
Now, for a story that offers a bit of a reprieve from all the heavy news, analog photography is making a comeback, and it's finding a particularly enthusiastic audience in Guatemala.
Oh, that's interesting in this digital age.
You'd think so, right?
Mm-hmm.
But young people in Guatemala are rediscovering the magic of film. They're drawn to the unique qualities of film, the grain, the colors, the imperfections. They appreciate the slower, more deliberate process of analog photography.
It's a nice change of pace from the instant gratification we've become accustomed to.
There's a small business in Guatemala called Arca Film Lab that's really embracing this trend.
Oh, tell me about them.
It's run by a young couple, Fabricio and Lucia, right out of their apartment. They develop all kinds of film, even that more challenging E6 process for slide film.
It's great that they've found a niche, but I imagine sourcing supplies in Guatemala must be difficult.
Absolutely. Getting cameras, chemicals, it's all a challenge. And importing those chemicals requires special permits and navigating a lot of bureaucracy. But despite those obstacles, they're incredibly passionate about their craft. And it's really resonated with their customers. They appreciate that personal touch.
It's inspiring to see their dedication, especially in a world where everything is becoming increasingly digital.
Now, for a story that delves into a very disturbing case in France, Dominique Pellicot was recently convicted of drugging his wife and allowing strangers to rape her.
That's horrific.
It's a truly shocking case that has brought the issue of chemical submission into the spotlight. And his daughter, Caroline Darien, is bravely speaking out about her family's trauma and her own experiences.
It must be incredibly difficult for her to share such a personal and painful story.
It is, but she's determined to raise awareness about this form of abuse, which is often hard to prove and prosecute.
What makes it even more challenging is that in cases like this, there are often no visible marks or physical evidence.
Exactly. It can be incredibly hard for victims to be believed, even by those closest to them. But Caroline's story has helped to create a space for other survivors to feel seen and heard.
That's so important. Now, let's turn our attention to South Korea, where there's a disturbing trend of online witch hunts targeting women for simply expressing feminist views.
It's unbelievable that something like that is happening in this day and age.
I know, it's a really unsettling trend. These online models are scrutinizing social media posts, looking for any hint of feminist ideology.
Often based on the flimsiest of evidence.
Exactly. And once they've identified a target, they launch these vicious campaigns of online harassment, spreading misinformation, even pressuring companies to fire these women.
It's scary how quickly things can escalate online.
And this isn't just happening in some dark corner of the internet. This is happening out in the open. The case of Darren Room, an animator who received death threats because of a hand gesture in a video game trailer, really highlights the severity of this abuse.
And what's worse is that some companies are actually giving in to these demands, firing their employees rather than standing up for them.
It's a cowardly act, prioritizing profit over people. And it speaks to a broader issue in South Korea where anti-feminist rhetoric has become increasingly mainstream, even finding a platform in the government under President Yoon Suk-yeol.
His efforts to dismantle the gender equality ministry and his dismissive attitude towards gender discrimination haven't helped the situation.
It's creating a really chilling effect where women are afraid to speak out for fear of being targeted.
Yeah. And sadly, the violence has even spilled over into the real world. There was a case where a woman named Jigu was brutally attacked for having short hair.
It's a terrifying example of how online hate can lead to real-world violence.
It's a wake-up call for companies and authorities to take this issue seriously and take steps to protect women from online harassment.
Absolutely. Now, let's travel back in time for a story about a murder mystery that gripped India in 1925. It's the Bala murder case, which led to the abdication of a Maharaja.
I remember hearing about this. Remind me, what was the case about?
It involved the murder of Abdul Qadir Bala, a prominent businessman, and the subsequent investigation that linked the Maharaja of Indore to the crime.
And what made this case so captivating?
It was a scandal of epic proportions. It had everything: wealth, power, a love triangle, and a brutal murder.
All the ingredients for a gripping story.
Exactly. And it wasn't just a sensational crime, it exposed the power dynamics between the British Raj and the Indian princely states. Well, the investigation revealed that Bala's companion, Mumtaz Begum, was a beautiful courtesan who had fled the Maharaja of Indore's harem and sought refuge in Bombay.
That must have caused quite a stir.
Oh, absolutely. And the evidence suggested that the Maharaja's people had threatened Bala for protecting Mumtaz Begum.
So the Maharaja was implicated in a murder. That must have put the British in a very difficult position.
It did. They were caught between a rock and a hard place. They had to deal with a powerful ally who might be involved in a murder. On one hand, they couldn't ignore the evidence and appear weak or complicit, but on the other, they had to maintain good relations with the Maharaja and his state.
So how did they handle it?
Well, they applied a lot of pressure behind the scenes, giving the Maharaja an ultimatum. He could either face a formal inquiry or step down. Faced with mounting pressure and potential damage to his reputation, the Maharaja chose to abdicate. It was a dramatic end to a story that captivated India and exposed the intricate workings of power during the colonial era.
It's a reminder that history is full of unexpected twists and turns. Even seemingly settled events can be reinterpreted in light of new evidence.
Absolutely. And it also highlights how individual actions, even within a colonial context, can have far-reaching consequences. Faced with mounting pressure and potential damage to his reputation, the Maharaja chose to abdicate. It was a dramatic end to a story that captivated India and exposed the intricate workings of power during the colonial era.
It's a reminder that history is full of unexpected twists and turns. Even seemingly settled events can be reinterpreted in light of new evidence.
Absolutely. And it also highlights how individual actions, even within a colonial context, can have far-reaching consequences.
Now, shifting gears a bit, let's talk about Indian cricket. They're facing a bit of a crisis after a string of disappointing performances.
Yeah, cricket's like a religion in India. Those recent losses have hit fans pretty hard. That 1-3 defeat to Australia in the Border Gavaskar Trophy, especially, a series they've dominated for the past decade, it's exposed some serious weaknesses.
Yeah, it's a tough pill to swallow for a team that was once considered a real powerhouse in Test cricket. What's behind this sudden decline?
Well, their batting lineup, which is usually a force to be reckoned with, really struggled throughout the series. Star players like Rohit Sharma and Virat Kohli, who were practically invincible at one point, have seen their form dip quite a bit.
It's surprising to hear that, especially for Kohli. He's been a legend for years. What's going on with him?
Well, even legends have their off days. Kohli's dismissals in Australia, there was a pattern there. Often caught in the slips or behind the stumps, Suggests maybe a technical flaw that's crept into his game. Or maybe just mental fatigue under all that pressure.
And Sharma, how did he do?
Even worse, actually. He only managed 31 runs in 3 test matches.
Wow.
Yeah, it was so bad he ended up dropping himself from the final game.
It's going to be tough, especially for a player of his caliber.
Yeah.
It raises questions about his leadership and his ability to, bounce back.
Absolutely. There's a lot of pressure on both Sharma and Kohli to turn things around.
It seems like Indian cricket's at a bit of a crossroads. This series has shown they need some fresh talent, a new generation of players to step up.
Yeah, there's a lot of hope riding on young players like Yashasvi Jaiswal, who is actually India's top scorer in the Australia series, and Shubman Gill, who a lot of people consider a rising star.
They sound promising, but it's not just the batting, is it? What about the bowling?
The bowling attack is still strong, but they lack the depth they used to have, especially with Ashwin's recent retirement.
So what's the plan? How do they bounce back from this?
Well, their next big challenge is a 5-test series in England, where they haven't won a series since 2007.
Talk about a tough test.
It is, but it's also a chance for redemption. The selectors have a tough job ahead of them, figuring out the right mix of experience and youth and how to get the best out of those struggling stars like Sharma and Kohli.
It's a make-or-break moment for Indian cricket. Can they rise to the challenge and get back to their winning ways? We'll have to wait and see.
Now, remember that separation ring from a rocket that crashed into that village in Kenya?
Oh, yeah, the one in Mukuku Village. What happened? Did they ever figure out what it was?
They did. It was definitely a separation ring from a space launch.
That's wild.
The villagers who were near the crash site when it happened, they've been reporting some strange symptoms, and they're worried about radiation exposure.
Like what kind of symptom?
They've been having headaches, nausea. Some even say their hair has started falling out.
Oh, that's concerning. Didn't the Kenya Space Agency say the radiation levels were safe?
They did initially, but maybe they need to do some more thorough testing. I mean, it's the villagers' health that's at stake.
For sure. This whole incident raises questions about, who's responsible when space debris falls back to Earth and causes damage. Or in this case, potential health problems.
Absolutely. As we continue exploring space, we have to think about these ethical and legal implications and develop some clear guidelines for accountability.
Now, back in the U.S., the legal battles surrounding Donald Trump are still going strong. Remember those calls for a new special counsel to investigate him after Jack Smith resigned?
Oh, yeah.
Well, the Justice Department has finally responded.
What did they say?
Instead of appointing a new special counsel, they've decided to create a special task force within the Justice Department to focus on these investigations.
So they're acknowledging the need for a dedicated team, but keeping it within the existing structure.
Some legal experts are calling it a good balance between independence and oversight, but others are worried the task force won't have the same freedom as a special counsel, that they'll be more susceptible to political pressure.
It'll be interesting to see how it all plays out. And speaking of interesting developments, there's been a new twist in the investigation of that Asiana Airlines crash.
What happened? Did they find that missing data?
Not quite. But they did find something else.
What's that?
Evidence that suggests those flight recorders might have been tampered with.
Tampered with? What do you mean?
Forensic analysis has found traces of a substance on the recorders. They think it's consistent with an electromagnetic pulse, an EMP.
An EMP? Like something out of a spy movie.
Yeah, right. But EMPs are real, and they can be used to disrupt electronic devices, including flight recorders.
So someone might have intentionally erased that last 4 minutes of data.
It's a possibility. Investigators are trying to figure out why. Could be a cover-up, maybe to hide a mechanical failure, pilot error, or something even more sinister.
Wow, that changes things. And what about that Russian oil tanker that lost power in the Baltic Sea? Any updates on that?
There have been some diplomatic ripples. Germany, along with a few other European countries, is pushing for tighter regulations on oil tankers operating in European waters.
Trying to prevent another Eventon incident.
Exactly. And Russia.
Russia's denying any wrongdoing, claiming the Eventon met all the safety standards. But they have said they're willing to discuss tanker safety with European officials.
Sounds like they're trying to avoid escalating the situation.
But I bet there's still some tension brewing behind the scenes.
No doubt. This whole thing has highlighted the strained relations between Russia and Europe, and it's a good example of how even a seemingly minor incident can turn into a major diplomatic headache.
Speaking of things that are making a comeback, remember that analog photography trend we talked about?
The one in Guatemala?
Yeah. Well, it seems that love for analog photography is spreading across Central America.
Oh, really? Where else?
Young people in El Salvador, Honduras, Nicaragua, they're all embracing film.
That's interesting. What do you think is driving this revival?
I think it's a yearning for something tangible in a world that's become so virtual. There's something special about holding a physical photograph, seeing the grain, the imperfections, something you don't get with a digital image.
I get it. It's about slowing down, appreciating the process, and creating something unique and personal.
Absolutely. Now, remember Caroline Darien, the woman who spoke out about experiencing chemical submission at the hands of her father.
Oh, yeah. What a heartbreaking story.
Her courage in coming forward has actually sparked a wave of similar testimonies from other women in France.
That's powerful.
It seems her story has given others the strength to share their own experiences. And, chemical submission is especially insidious. It often doesn't leave any physical evidence, making it hard for victims to be believed.
It's incredibly difficult. But stories like Caroline's are crucial for raising awareness and creating a space for survivors to feel supported.
Now, for an update on those online witch hunts, targeting women for their feminist views in South Korea.
Oh yeah, those were disturbing.
It's gotten worse, unfortunately.
How so?
Several big South Korean companies have been accused of caving to pressure from these online mobs and firing women who were targeted.
They're basically punishing women for having an opinion.
It's a terrible situation. They're putting profits ahead of their employees' well-being.
It's really disappointing.
Thankfully, there's been a backlash. People are calling for boycotts, demanding accountability. Human rights groups are speaking out, too, condemning these actions as a violation of basic human rights.
That's good to hear. Hopefully it'll push those companies to do the right thing.
Now, for an update on that murder mystery from India, the Bala murder case. Remember how the Maharaja was forced to abdicate?
Oh, yeah, what a story.
Well, it seems there might be more to the story than we initially thought. New evidence has surfaced that suggests the Maharaja may have been framed.
Framed.
There are some newly uncovered documents, letters, and diary entries that point to a group of British officials who wanted to consolidate their power in India.
And they saw the Maharaja as a problem.
It seems so. The evidence suggests they may have orchestrated the whole thing to discredit the Maharaja and remove him from power.
Wow, if that's true, it could completely rewrite history. It's amazing how new evidence can change our understanding of the past.
Now, switching gears to sports. There's some exciting news for cricket fans in India. A group of former cricket legends has come together to launch a new academy.
Oh, that's cool. Who's behind it?
Some big names, actually. Sachin Tendulkar, Rahul Dravid, Sourav Ganguly.
Wow, some serious cricketing royalty.
They're calling it the Legends Cricket Academy, and their goal is to train the next generation of Indian cricketers.
That's awesome.
They're focusing on developing both technical skills and mental toughness, instilling those values of discipline, dedication, and teamwork.
What a fantastic initiative. It could really help revitalize Indian cricket. Now, remember those villagers in Kenya who were worried about radiation exposure after that rocket park crash near their homes?
Oh yeah, whatever came of that.
Well, they finally got some answers. Independent testing confirmed that the separation ring did have traces of radioactive material.
Oh no.
But the levels were relatively low.
So is it safe?
Well, the experts say it's not considered dangerous, but some doctors are saying we need to be careful, especially with children and pregnant women, because even low levels of radiation can have long-term effects.
It's a reminder that as we explore space, we have to think about those risks, not just for astronauts, but for people on Earth too.
Absolutely. Safety has to be a top priority. Now, let's head back to the U.S. where the Trump investigations continue. Remember those calls for a new special counsel?
Yeah, what happened with that?
The Justice Department has decided to go in a different direction. They're creating a special task force within the department to handle those investigations.
So no new special counsel.
It seems like a compromise, acknowledging the need for a dedicated team, but keeping it under the Justice Department's control.
I guess we'll have to wait and see how it all works out. And what about that Asiana Airlines crash investigation? Did they figure out what happened to those missing 4 minutes of data?
Well, it's even more complicated now. A whistleblower has come forward.
A whistleblower.
They're claiming that a high-ranking official in the South Korean government orchestrated the tampering of those flight recorders.
To cover up the truth.
Apparently so. The whistleblower says this official was trying to protect South Korea's airline industry, worried that a major crash would be bad for business.
So they chose to cover up a potential safety issue. That's a dangerous game to play.
It is. It raises questions about corruption and lack of accountability.
It's a serious accusation. What about the Russian oil tanker incident? Any fallout from that?
It's actually triggered a global push for stricter regulations on oil tankers. Environmental groups and several governments are calling for stricter safety standards, mandatory inspections, and more accountability from shipping companies.
That's good to hear. It's a reminder that sometimes it takes a major incident to bring about real change.
It also shows how interconnected our world is. What happens in one corner of the globe can have ripple effects everywhere.
And on a more positive note, remember that young couple running the ARCA Film Lab in Guatemala? The ones developing analog film.
Oh yeah, I loved that story.
They finally got a loan to open a dedicated storefront for their business.
That's amazing. Good for them.
They're really excited to expand and create a space for workshops, exhibitions, and community events all around analog photography.
That's so inspiring. It's a reminder that passion and hard work can pay off, even in tough times.
And we're back with more news from around the world. Last we left off, we were talking about the Bala murder case in India and the possibility that the Maharaja might have been framed.
Oh, yeah, that was a wild story. If that new evidence holds up, it could really change how we understand British colonialism in India. It makes you wonder, how many other historical narratives are out there that might not be telling the whole story.
Absolutely. It's a good reminder that history is constantly being re-examined, reinterpreted. We should always be questioning what we think we know.
Exactly. Okay, so for something a little lighter, let's talk about cricket, specifically Indian cricket, which has been struggling a bit lately. Well, there's some good news for fans. A bunch of former Indian cricket legends have teamed up to launch a brand new cricket academy.
That's cool. Who are we talking about here?
Some of the biggest names in Indian cricket. Sachin Tendulkar, Rahul Dravid, Sourav Ganguly, they're all involved.
Wow, serious star power. What's the goal of this academy?
They want to create a world-class training facility to nurture the next generation of Indian cricketers. They're focusing on both technical skills and, mental toughness, which is so important in a high-pressure sport like cricket.
I like that they're taking a holistic approach.
Right. It's not just about hitting the ball or bowling. It's about building character, resilience. They want to pass on those values of discipline, dedication, and teamwork, which were so crucial to their own success.
It's a fantastic initiative. Maybe this is just what Indian cricket needs to get back on top.
I hope so. Okay, let's circle back to that rocket part that crashed in Kenya. The one with the separation ring. Remember those villagers who were worried about radiation?
Oh, yeah. Whatever happened with that?
Well, there's been some new developments. The independent testing that they did confirmed that the separation ring did, in fact, carry some traces of radioactive material.
Uh-oh, that's not good.
Yeah, it's definitely concerning. But the experts are saying that the levels were actually pretty low, not considered dangerous. However, some doctors are urging caution, pointing out that even low-level radiation exposure could have long-term health consequences, especially for kids and pregnant women.
Yeah, radiation is tricky like that. It seems like we need more research in this area, especially as space travel becomes more common. We have to figure out how to deal with the debris and make sure we're not putting people at risk.
I completely agree. Okay, switching gears back to the U.S., let's talk about those Trump investigations. Remember how some people were calling for a new special counsel after Jack Smith resigned? Well, the Justice Department finally made a decision.
They're appointing a new special counsel.
Actually, no. They're going with a different approach. They're creating a special task force within the Justice Department to handle those investigations.
So no new special counsel. Interesting.
It's definitely a compromise. It acknowledges the need for a dedicated team to focus on these cases, but it also keeps everything under the Justice Department's roof.
Makes sense. I guess we'll see how it plays out. What about the Asiana Airlines crash? Any news on that front?
You are not going to believe this. Remember how investigators were suspicious about those flight recorders being tampered with?
Yeah, the EMP thing. That was weird.
Well, get this. A whistleblower has come forward claiming that a high-ranking South Korean government official orchestrated the whole thing.
Wait, what? Seriously?
Yeah. Apparently, they were trying to protect the reputation of South Korea's airline industry. They were worried that if it came out that the crash was caused by a mechanical failure or pilot error, it would be really bad for business.
So instead of, addressing the problem and making sure things are safe, they chose to cover it up.
It sure looks that way. It's a pretty shocking accusation. If it's true, it says a lot about corruption and the lack of accountability.
It's a big if, but if it turns out to be true, there are going to be some serious consequences. All right, what about that Russian oil tanker that was adrift in the Baltic? Any updates on that situation?
Yeah, that whole incident has actually had a much bigger impact than anyone expected. It sparked a global movement for stricter regulations and better oversight of the shipping industry.
That's good. At least some good came out of that mess.
Right. It was a wake-up call, a reminder of how much we rely on maritime transport and how important it is to make sure those ships are safe and well-maintained.
Okay, to end on a high note, I have a heartwarming story about that young couple running the Arca Film Lab in Guatemala, the ones who are developing analog film.
Oh yeah, I love those guys.
Well, guess what? They finally got a loan, and they're opening a real storefront for their business.
That is amazing news. They totally deserve it.
They're so excited to expand their operation. Now they can do even more with analog photography, like workshops and exhibitions, and even some community events.
This is what it's all about. Passion, hard work, and a little bit of luck.
It really is a great story. And on that note, that's a wrap for today's show. Thanks for joining us for another daily news roundup. As always, we encourage you to stay curious, stay informed, and stay engaged with the world around you.
And we'll be back tomorrow with more news you need to know.